Hello, everyone. Today we'll be watching the worst mistakes humans have ever made. And, well, I'm sure we're not surprised. We've made some pretty bad ones. But let's get to it.
The Chernobyl disaster. On April 26,
Yeah,
1986,
Chernobyl was
engineers at
bad.
the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukrainian SSR, Soviet Union, decided to conduct a safety test that would forever change history. They wanted to see if the plant's turbines could generate enough electricity to power the safety system.
On one hand, it did change history, but we now have all kinds of nuclear safety precautions that we didn't have before. Well, or rather, some people didn't have before.
During an emergency shutdown. They
But it
began
was
reducing the
terrible.
reactor's power during the day shift on April 25th, but the test was delayed for hours due to unexpected grid demand and later handed over to the night shift. The night crew was less experienced with this specific procedure, but they proceeded anyway. At 12:28
Yeah.
a.m., the reactor should have been lowered to 700 to 1,000 megawatts thermal, but due to operator error, it dropped to just 30 megawatts thermal.
Yeah, there was
At
no way
this
to do it.
dangerously low level, the reactor became unstable, with xenon gas building up and poisoning the nuclear reaction. Rather than stopping the test, they decided to continue. To compensate for the low power, they withdrew most of the control rods that regulate the nuclear
Yeah,
reaction.
and then it
This
went
left
the
the
other way
reactor
and
in an
spiked.
extremely dangerous state. As the test was underway, the reactor became increasingly unstable. At 1:23:40 a.m., the operators pressed the AZ-5 emergency shutdown button, initiating a chain of events that led to the explosion seconds later. However, the reactor's power surged uncontrollably within seconds. The control rod design itself contributed to the disaster, as the initial insertion of the
Yeah.
graphite-tipped control rods
They, they,
actually
they weren't
increased
aware of that,
reactivity
though.
before they could fully insert to shut down the reaction. Two massive explosions destroyed the reactor core, blasting off its upper biological shield and releasing radioactive material into the atmosphere. The explosion was so powerful it could be seen from miles away. Radioactive debris rained down on the surrounding area. In the official records, just 30 people were counted
Yeah,
among the
no, they
immediate
did
dead.
not
But in the
even
days that
bother
followed the
trying
explosion,
to, get
radioactive
an accurate
fallout
count.
drifted silently across Europe. Nearly 2 days later, radiation alarms went off not in the Soviet Union, but at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, revealing to the world that something catastrophic had occurred. Rain carried radioactive particles into fields, forests, and cities thousands of miles away. Milk was poured away, vegetables were destroyed,
Yeah, it was all
and parents across
contaminated.
Europe were told to keep their children indoors, often without understanding how serious the danger truly was. The threat was invisible.
Now we understand, but before they didn't even have like anything before that to actually compare it to. They were just like told, oh yeah, there's radiation, but they didn't know what it did or how it affected people. Now we do, but before they only had to take people's words for it.
Borderless, and impossible to escape.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the city of Pripyat was evacuated in silence. Nearly 50,000 people left their homes believing they would return
Yeah,
in a
they
few
told them, oh
days.
yeah, they'll
They
be
never
right
did.
back.
Their
Never.
apartments, schools, and amusement
You
parks
still
were
can't go
frozen
back.
in time, becoming permanent monuments to a disaster that erased an entire city overnight. In the years and decades that followed, hundreds of thousands of liquidators were sent in to contain the aftermath, many at great personal cost. The true
Yeah.
number of radiation-related deaths remains disputed to this day, with estimates ranging from several thousand to far higher. Chernobyl reshaped nuclear safety
Yeah.
worldwide and exposed the dangers of secrecy and design failure, proving that some technological mistakes do not stay local and that the scars of
Yeah, because it's one thing if you can like contain it, but it's nuclear. You can't really say for certain you can. And they were all about secrecy, so they didn't tell them the flaws of the reactor. And then when it did blow up, they had no choice but to acknowledge it. But it took the disaster happening to do so.
a single night can last for generations.
Humans.
The Mars Climate Orbiter. On December 11, 1998, NASA launched the Mars Climate Orbiter, a $125 million mission to study Mars's climate and atmosphere. After a 9-month journey through space, the spacecraft was scheduled to enter Mars's
Yeah, Mars
orbit
is pretty
on
far
September 23,
but it's
1999.
still close
Everything
relative to
seemed
like
perfect as the
space.
orbiter approached the red planet. Mission controllers watched nervously as the spacecraft disappeared behind Mars, as planned, to begin its orbital insertion. They waited for the signal confirming successful orbit, but it never came. The Mars Climate Orbiter was gone forever. The investigation revealed one of the costliest measurement mistakes in history.
Oh
Lockheed
no.
Martin, the spacecraft's contractor, had programmed their navigation software using imperial units, pound force seconds. NASA's team,
Oh.
however, expected the data in metric units, Newton seconds. For nearly 9 months, navigation errors accumulated due to the unit mismatch by a factor of
Yeah,
4.45.
that's just
Instead of passing at a
unfortunate.
safe altitude of about 87 miles, the spacecraft dipped to roughly 35
It
miles.
was gone.
At that low altitude, Mars's thin atmosphere was still thick enough to destroy the spacecraft. The orbiter either burned up in the atmosphere or crashed into the
It
planet's
broke
surface.
apart.
A simple unit conversion error destroyed a $125 million spacecraft
I
and
mean,
contributed to a
at
total
scale like
program failure,
those,
costing
units
nearly
become
$328
important.
million. The Mishap Investigation Board concluded it was a failure to recognize and correct an error in the transfer of information between the spacecraft operations team. The gas
Yeah,
leak incident. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, was
I
undergoing
think I've
routine
heard about
maintenance work.
this.
The plant produced Sevin, a popular pesticide using methyl isocianate, a highly toxic chemical that required extreme safety measures. That night,
It's kind of
maintenance
wild.
work
You
was
use
being
that as
conducted on
pesticide.
pipes connected to methyl
You might
isocianate
end up
storage
poisoning
tank
yourself trying to eat the fruit.
E610. Water somehow entered the tank containing 42 tons of methyl isocianate, most likely due to failures in isolation procedures during maintenance. The water mixed with the chemical,
It's not
creating
looking
an
so good that
unstable
most of these
reaction.
are just
Temperature
human
inside the tank
error.
began rising rapidly. Around 10:30 p.m., pressure continued building as safety and containment systems were either not
Not
functioning
Drake
or
saying
overwhelmed.
no.
The chemical reaction became uncontrollable as temperature and pressure soared. At 12:56 a.m. on December 3rd, a massive relief valve burst open, releasing a deadly cloud of methyl isocianate gas into the air. The toxic cloud spread across Bhopal's sleeping
That's
residents.
sad.
People woke up with burning eyes, difficulty breathing, and severe coughing. Many ran outside, which made their exposure worse.
Yeah, because they
Others
didn't even know
collapsed
what
in
was
their beds,
happening.
never waking up. Several thousand people died in the first few days following the disaster. More than 500,000 people were exposed to the toxic gas. Long-term death tolls are estimated between 15,000 and 20,000 people.
That's
A
sad.
cascade of safety failures, including the failure to properly isolate the tank, led to one of history's deadliest industrial accidents. The
Yeah, and things
Challenger
like these
disaster.
happen,
On
and you can't really, like, before it happens, no one really focuses on it. And after it happens, there's always been casualties. So it's just like
January 28,
a pain to deal
1986,
with.
Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Kennedy Space Center, carrying 7 crew members, including teacher Krista McAuliffe, who was set to become the first civilian to teach from space. The launch had been
Hmm.
delayed multiple times due to unusually cold weather, with temperatures around freezing and even colder conditions at the critical joints. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the
They would
company
never
that built
delay,
the
though.
shuttle's solid rocket boosters, were deeply concerned. They
Oh,
had warned NASA that the rubber O-ring seals in the joints might fail in cold temperatures. The O-rings were designed to
at
prevent
least they
hot
weren't
gas
blindly
from escaping
confident.
the rocket boosters. In
But it was
cold weather,
cold.
the rubber
Yeah,
became stiff and might not seal
it
properly.
might
The night
fracture
before launch,
or
Thiokol
tear.
engineers recommended postponing until temperatures warmed up. During a tense teleconference, they presented data showing O-ring problems in previous cold weather launches. But NASA was under enormous pressure. The launch had already been delayed 6 times.
Yeah,
President Reagan was scheduled to mention the mission in his State of the Union address that evening. NASA managers questioned the engineering data and asked Thiokol to reconsider. After heated discussion, Thiokol management overruled their own engineers and gave NASA the go-ahead. At 11:39 a.m.,
who do you
Challenger
blame
launched into a
then?
clear, cold morning sky. Just 73 seconds after liftoff, at an altitude of 48,000 feet, cameras captured a flame shooting from the right solid rocket booster. The O-ring seal had failed exactly as engineers
Yeah.
predicted. Hot gas escaped and burned through the
I
external.
mean, the engineers are the people who worked on it. Management for the company overruling them is kind of stupid because you are management, but the engineers are the ones that put it together. But, that's just, we don't always use common sense. And sometimes you just get overruled by someone higher than you.
Fuel tank side. The external fuel tank ruptured and disintegrated, breaking the shuttle apart. All 7 crew members died. The Rogers Commission concluded that the O-ring failure was foreseeable
That's
and could
sad.
have been prevented. The decision
Yeah,
to
it could
launch
have.
despite
Just
engineering
delay.
warnings became a textbook case of organizational failure and the dangers of ignoring technical expertise.
Yeah, because you overruled the
9/11
engineers.
communication failures. Throughout the summer of
Oh,
2001, multiple U.S. intelligence agencies received warnings about an impending terrorist attack on American soil. These warnings, if properly connected and acted upon, might have helped prevent the September 11th attacks that killed 2,977 people. On August 6, 2001, the CIA delivered a presidential daily brief to George W. Bush titled Bin Laden, Determined to Strike in U.S. The brief mentioned that FBI investigations had found patterns of suspicious activity consistent with preparations for hijackings or other attacks in the United States. However, the brief was general and didn't specify targets or timing. Meanwhile, the FBI had crucial pieces of information they failed to properly investigate. In July
Wow.
2001, FBI agent Kenneth Williams in Phoenix wrote a memo warning that Middle Eastern men were taking flight lessons at Arizona flight schools. He suggested that Al Qaeda might be training pilots for terrorist operations. The memo was
They
largely
trained
ignored
in
by
the
FBI
US.
headquarters. More critically, in late August 2001, CIA officials learned that two known Al Qaeda operatives, Khalid al Mihtar and Nawaf al Hazmi, had entered the United States. The CIA had been tracking them since early 2000, but failed to place them on the FBI's terrorist watch list until very late in the process. When the
Uh,
FBI finally began searching for them, it was too late. They were already in the final stages of preparing for the attacks. The most tragic near miss occurred on August 16, 2001, when FBI agent Harry Sammet arrested Zacharias Moussaoui at a Minnesota flight school. Moussaoui was taking lessons on flying large commercial aircraft, but wasn't interested in learning how to take off or land. His
that didn't
instructors
raise a
found this
flag?
suspicious and contacted the FBI. Agent Sammet tried desperately to get approval for a warrant to search Moussaoui's computer, believing he was planning something catastrophic. He
And they
sent
denied
numerous
him?
messages to FBI headquarters, but his requests were repeatedly denied due to bureaucratic hurdles. If
Wow.
approved, the search might have revealed critical links to terrorist networks or plans for an imminent attack. The 9/11 Commission concluded that the attack succeeded largely due to failures in information sharing between agencies, bureaucratic
It was
obstacles
just
to prevent
kind of
swift
like, just
action,
let
and a
happen at
lack of
this point.
imagination about how terrorists might use civilian aircraft as weapons.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's
The
true.
Banqiao
You won't
Dam
really
nightmare.
think
In
of using a plane as a missile until after 9/11 when it happened. A lot of this is horrible in hindsight, but when it's before it happens, you can't really like fathom it. Of course, it was their jobs to actually pay attention and find out what was wrong. And they failed.
1952, Chinese engineers began construction of the Banqiao Dam across the Ru River in Henan province. The project was part of Chairman Mao's ambitious plan to rapidly modernize China, but the combination of extreme weather and systematic failures led to catastrophe. The dam was designed to handle approximately 500 millimeters of rainfall over 3 days, which was considered adequate for the region's typical weather patterns. Chinese engineer Chen Xing warned about potential flood risks in the
It's
typhoon.
always the engineers telling people that, yeah, it's not gonna work, but they just get overruled or ignored. Like, I understand you are the ones leading it and directing it, but you still have to listen to the engineers. They made it.
Typhoon
You can't
project,
just disregard
but
them
his
after they
concerns were
built it.
dismissed, and he was labeled a political rightist and removed from the
Oh
project.
boy.
Construction continued, and the dam was completed in 1953. On August 5, 1975, Typhoon Nina made landfall in China. The storm had been weakened by its path over land, but it stalled over the Banqiao Dam region due
Did it
to
just pile
unusual
up?
weather patterns. For 3 days, the storm dumped
It just kept
unprecedented amounts of
raining.
rain
Oh
on the
my.
watershed. In some areas, over 1,000 millimeters fell in 24 hours, far exceeding what the dam was designed to
Yeah.
handle. Water levels rose rapidly. Dam operators tried to release water through the spillways, but they couldn't discharge
Yeah,
it
it
fast
wasn't
enough.
enough.
They attempted to contact higher authorities for permission to open the floodgates wider, but communication lines had been knocked out by the storm. At 1 a.m.
It
on
just goes
August
from
8,
bad to worse.
1975, the Banqiao Dam collapsed catastrophically. A massive wall of water several meters high and approximately 6 miles wide roared down the
Damn.
river valley. The flood destroyed entire villages in minutes.
Yeah,
The
6 miles
collapse triggered a
wide. Yeah,
cascade
no.
failure of more than 60 other dams downstream. The official death toll was 26,000 people, but some estimates suggest it reached 240,000. The extreme
This is why it's important to listen to engineers who built it.
rainfall event, combined with communication failures and insufficient spillway
Like, everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But in the end, you should have listened to the engineer instead of just dismissing him.
capacity during the emergency, caused one of history's deadliest dam failures, the Hiroshima bomb. On August 6, 1945, at
Yeah.
8:15 a.m., the Enola Gay dropped Little Boy, the first
It wasn't really an accident, it was intended, which is kind of crazy, but it was a tragedy and a very terrible one.
atomic bomb ever used in warfare on Hiroshima,
Yeah,
Japan.
because it was
The
mainly
decision to use
civilians.
this weapon, and specifically to target a populated city,
Yeah.
became one of the most controversial choices in human history. President Harry Truman faced an agonizing decision. Some military estimates suggested that a conventional invasion of Japan could cost
Would
hundreds
cost
of
a lot of
thousands of
lives,
American
yeah.
lives, with potentially millions more on both sides. The atomic
But
bomb
then you
seemed like
just
a way to
sacrifice
end
the
the war
civilians
quickly and
instead.
save lives on both sides. The Target Committee, composed of American military officials, created a list of potential cities based on military significance and psychological impact. Hiroshima was chosen because it housed military headquarters and weapons factories, but also because it was largely undamaged by previous bombing raids, making it an ideal target
To see
demonstrate
what
the
would
bomb's
happen? Oh,
devastating
wow.
power to maximum effect. Hiroshima was home to hundreds of thousands of people, including both military personnel
And
and civilians.
civilians, yeah.
The bomb was targeted at the city center rather than the military installations on the
Yeah.
outskirts. At the moment of detonation, the bomb created a fireball with temperatures reaching several thousand degrees Celsius. Near the hypocenter, temperatures were so extreme that people and structures were
Yeah, they
instantly
just
incinerated.
vaporized, yeah.
People up to 1.5 miles away suffered severe burns and radiation exposure.
And it was so bad you could still see like shadows of where people were standing, where the light reached them. But because there was like a second between them getting evaporated and the light reaching the ground, it left shadows. It's really sad.
Exposure. Approximately 70,000 people died immediately or within hours. By the end of 1945, the death toll had risen to between
Yeah, because you have all
100,000
the
and 140,000
other effects like
as more people
radiation.
succumbed
Yeah.
to radiation sickness and injuries. Decades
Yeah,
later,
and the burns
many
and
questioned
stuff.
whether the bomb needed to be dropped on a populated area. Some historians argue that a demonstration on an uninhabited area might have
It
convinced
might have
Japan to
worked.
surrender. Others argue that Japan's leadership was already internally divided over surrender, especially after the Soviet Union entered the war against them on August 8th. The decision to
But we'd
target a
never know
populated city
because
center
they
rather
chose
than pursuing alternatives that might
civilians.
have achieved the same strategic goal remains one of history's most debated choices.
You know, you just can't
The
know.
Titanic tragedy. On April 10, 1912, the RMS Titanic began its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City. The ship was hailed as unsinkable due to revolutionary safety
Uh, I'm not sure why they have to play with fate like that. Unsinkable and then proceeds to sink.
features, but multiple design limitations and operational decisions doomed the vessel and more than
I mean,
1,500
it's usually just
passengers.
human error.
The White Star Line, Titanic's owner, faced intense competition from rival companies building faster, more luxurious
Not the
ships.
Flying
The
Dutchman.
ship's watertight bulkheads, the walls designed to prevent flooding from spreading between compartments, had a critical limitation. Many of these bulkheads only extended to E deck, several levels below the main deck. This meant that if the ship took on enough water and
It
the
would
bow
just
dipped
get
low
dragged
enough,
down.
water could spill over the bulkheads from one compartment to the next. Another critical
It wasn't fully sealed? That is crazy. Normally it's like, well, nowadays the modern ships are like fully compartmentalized. So like even if it fills, it doesn't overflow. But if it overflows and the ship is going down, it's just gonna compound and keep overflowing the other compartments.
factor involved the lifeboats. British Board of Trade regulations at the time, based on tonnage calculations for older, smaller vessels, required
Oh no, they did not. You didn't see it, but oh my God, no. Okay, let's just keep going.
Titanic
Let's
to
keep
carry
going.
lifeboat capacity for far fewer people than were actually aboard. The
Yeah,
ship carried
no.
lifeboats for approximately 1,178 people, while about 2,200
It was the confidence of being unsinkable. We don't need lifeboats for everyone because the ship would never sink. The ship proceeds to sink and they don't have lifeboats for everyone.
passengers and crew were on board, meaning the lifeboats could accommodate only about half the people. On the
Yeah.
night of April 14th, 1912, traveling at nearly full speed through ice-filled waters despite receiving ice warnings, Titanic struck an iceberg at
Oh, so I
11:40
hate.
p.m.
Okay.
The impact created a series of openings caused by hull deformation and rivet failure below the waterline, flooding 6 of the ship's watertight compartments. Because many
Watertight, they
bulkheads
say.
didn't extend high enough, and the
It
bow
just kept
dipped as water
overflowing.
flooded the forward compartments, water spilled from one compartment to the next. The
Yeah.
ship was designed to survive flooding in 4 compartments, but not 6. As Titanic took
It's
on more
always
water,
just,
the insufficient
it can survive this, but then it ended up being this. It's just pain.
lifeboat capacity proved
Just build it
disastrous.
properly.
During the evacuation, many lifeboats were lowered only partially filled because there hadn't been adequate drills, and passengers didn't understand the severity of the situation. The first lifeboat launched with only 28 people aboard, despite having capacity for 65. By 2:20 a.m.
It's
on
always
April
human
15th,
error.
Titanic had completely sunk. The combination of speed through known ice fields, bulkhead design limitations, inadequate
The lack of
lifeboat regulations,
lifeboats, yeah.
and poor evacuation procedures contributed to the enormous loss of life in what became history's most famous maritime disaster. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.
Oh. We'll get to that eventually. Thank you for watching. 1 second. Okay. So that was the worst mistakes humans have ever made. And, well, yeah, they were pretty terrible. And most of them were really just humans being stubborn. But humans don't always act rationally. We just kind of do whatever we want. And we have to pay the price for that. And other people too, sadly, when they don't get a say. But that's all for today. If you like watching my videos, feel free to like and subscribe, comment on what you want me to watch, and I'll see you in the next one.